Chapter 14. The Alliance. Dementia and Willowwood soon realised that the puddle of blood that they were standing in was in fact a continuous stream of blood. It was supplied with its constant flow by the thousands of dead, rotting carcasses that hung from hooks and bled out. The rotting meat and congealing blood attracted millions of greedy murd flies. Murd flies are about 3 times larger than your average domestic earth fly, and about twice as noisy. They have sharp teeth and pack quite a nasty bite. They spread hideous diseases as they move from one carcass to another. Collectively, they made a high-pitched droning sound that pierced deep into the eardrums and left one's ears ringing. The mix of dry heat, rotting meat, congealing blood and droning murd flies was more than Dementia could take. It filled his soul with sadness and despair. Willowwood was having similar reservations. He would rather starve than ever set foot in this land's infamous meat market again. It was not so easy to leave, though. Hundreds of desperate stallholders used charm, intimidation, and brute force to persuade Dementia and Willowwood into purchasing their cuts of meat. It was a race against time for all of them. In only a few hours' time, the ravenous murdflies would have completely demolished all of the meat, and the stallholders would go home penniless. Making matters worse was the fact that these revolting flies were flourishing in this meat-rich environment and multiplying at an alarming rate. Every day their numbers seemed to increase twofold, and the meat would be polished off even quicker. This made the stallholders more and more desperate. It was a dangerous downward spiral. Dementia's first mission would be to cull these flies completely, but for now his attention was focused solely on getting himself, Hildegard, and Willowwood out of this hellhole in one piece. They finally made their way past the last of the frustrated stallholders that blocked their passage. Willowwood's delicate skin was now severely bruised and battered. Dementia's synthetic skin was scuffed and torn. Poor Hildegard looked like a broken helix-shaped slinky. They made their way down a narrow road that led to a shanty town. Every flimsy building appeared to be made out of leftover scraps. Not a single tree or plant could be seen. Not even a blade of grass dared to raise its head. With nothing to anchor the soil, dry sand blew around and painfully whipped their skin. Rodent-like creatures scampered around brazenly between piles of abandoned garbage and puddles of raw sewer. The smell was even worse than that of the meat market's congealing blood. Along the way, they were constantly harassed by swarms of filthy, dirty, undernourished children. The children grabbed at them desperately, begging for food and water. Dementia's soul burned with sadness as he was forced to callously swat them away. Many were younger than Willowwood. This was no way for children to live. He would need to sort out this sad state of affairs as well. His soul gained an enormous boost of positive energy as he saw a very overweight-looking sugar fairy approaching him from a distance. She was screaming his name excitedly as she waddled her way towards him. By now, she was too heavy to hop and skip. His excitement turned to anger as he suddenly noticed that a massive Doolan dragon was sneaking up behind her. It appeared to have a large lump on its head. Dementia grabbed hold of Old Faithful and then threw her high into the air. As she came somersaulting back downwards, he started to recite his sleep-bake spell. "Doolan dragon from the south, shut your eyes and close your mouth. Go to sleep and do not wake until such a time as the first breads bake." Poor Frother collapsed in a heap. He was fast asleep. Harry furiously launched himself off his fallen friend's head and ran as fast as his 30 limbs would allow towards Dementia, with a mix of grief and murder in his eyes. Magica was astonished by the speed, courage, and outright stupidity that Harry was displaying. It was strongly advisable to never charge a soul wizard who had their wand drawn, especially not a supreme soul wizard of Dementia's reputation.
"Prepare to die, you horrible, horrible, stupid blue-skinned wizard!" screamed Harry. "Nobody destroys my very best friend and gets away with it!"
Dementia raised Old Faithful again and began another chant. "Stop, Harry! Stop, Dementia!" screamed Magica. Harry slammed on the brakes and Dementia stopped his chant mid-sentence. She frantically tried to explain to Dementia that Harry and Frother were friends of hers, whilst at the same time trying to convince Harry that Dementia was in fact a kind, well-respected soul wizard. Dementia assured Magica and Harry that Frother had not been harmed. He was merely sleeping, and would awake in the morning when the first bread started to bake. This concerned Magica, and she asked Dementia if he could please reverse the spell. Unfortunately, this particular spell was irreversible and had to run its course. She knew that if Frother was left out in the open overnight, totally defenceless, he would appear on several meat hooks at the meat market the next morning. There was only one thing to do under the circumstances. The companions groaned and huffed and puffed as they dragged Frother's huge sleeping body to safety, using his enormous tail for leverage. Millimetre by millimetre they edged him closer and closer to the friendly territory. The friendly territory was so named because it was a place where all those who were honest, decent, and law-abiding took refuge. If you chose to leave this safe haven, you did so at your own risk. Nobody would come to your rescue if you were suddenly attacked. And more likely than not, you would be attacked. It was like stepping into a new world as they crossed over into the friendly territory. Solid brick houses were surrounded by pretty, well-manicured gardens. Each house had a healthy-looking vegetable patch and a variety of blossoming fruit trees. Happy, well-nourished children played ball games and catch in the street. They smiled and laughed, oblivious to the horror that lurked only kilometres away. Teams of these good citizens took turns standing guard all day and all night. There was no fencing or protective shields to prevent entry, so those on guard had to be extremely vigilant, especially at night, when it was almost always pitch dark. The stars shone very dimly at night because they were heavily masked by the plumes of thick smoke that rose up from the hundreds of bonfires that burned relentlessly in the shanty town. It was the unfriendlies' way of keeping themselves warm at night. From time to time, a few unfriendlies would manage to sneak through unnoticed, and the good citizens would be left to mourn the loss of yet more of their fallen comrades. Dementia realised that this was no way to live. He vowed to change this place, even if it meant sacrificing his own life in the process. Having left Hildegard in the safe hands of one of the Friendly's most respected doctors, Dementia and Willowwood settled down for a well-earned rest. Both fell into a deep sleep only moments after shutting their eyes. Instead of having a peaceful, rejuvenating sleep, Dementia had a terrible nightmare. In it, Trazon suddenly appeared in front of him, carrying a huge barrel that was filled to the brim with the ashes of the deceased Elkwoodians.
"I'm missing one last bit of ash," he laughed. "I've come to get it."
Trazon was, of course, referring to Willowwood. Dementia tried with all his might to attack Trazon and defend Willowwood, but for some reason he was totally paralysed. He could not even move a single finger. He watched in horror as Trazon grabbed Willowwood by the hand and casually walked off with him.
"Willowwood!"
screamed the sleeping Dementia.
"Willowwood!"
Willowwood awoke with a huge fright and rushed to Dementia's side. The aging wizard's entire body was convulsing as if he were having an epileptic fit, and his eyeballs were shooting forwards and backwards under their closed rubber eyelids. Willowwood tried everything possible to wake Dementia from this awful nightmare, but not even prodding him with a sharp stick managed to release him from its powerful grasp. He was eventually forced to pour a cold bucket of water over Dementia's head. Dementia awoke with an expression of severe shock on his face and looked around frantically for Willowwood.
"It's okay, Dementia," cried Willowwood. "I'm right here."
Dementia pulled the Elkwoodian elf towards him by his broad shoulders and gave the boy an enormous hug. Although it had only been a dream, soul wizards' dreams often served to warn them of impending doom. Dementia was too afraid to go back to sleep for fear of having the same dream again. Instead, he decided to venture alone beyond the boundaries of the friendly territory. He was not overly concerned about doing this because soul wizards of his ability are almost indestructible. The risk was fairly minimal. He watched with despair as creatures fought to the death over rotting scraps of food. He was stabbed in the back several times. His attackers ran for dear life as he continued forward without even flinching. He then came across a huge mob of unfriendlies who were rejoicing loudly. They had formed a tight circle around their vanquished prey, and they were mercilessly taunting it. Dementia pushed himself through the crowd and entered the centre of the circle. Cowering on the floor like a trapped rat was a creature he'd seen earlier today. It was one of the friendlies, a middle-aged adult male named Wertheimer. He appeared fairly human, save for the fact that his head was attached to his left shoulder and his bum was attached to his right shoulder. And no, his nickname was not Fartface. Wertheimer had been happily walking the streets of the friendly territory earlier today, with his 3 chubby kids trailing merrily behind him. How his fortunes had turned within the space of a few hours. The crowd of unfriendlies could not believe their luck. Another friendly had seemingly surrendered himself to them. Why else would a friendly be foolish enough to enter a circle of death? 2 friendlies meant twice the entertainment. The beatings would last longer and could be shared around more equally. Dementia shielded Wertheimer as best he could. The punches and kicks and stabs had no impact on him. It was only when one of them tried to grab Old Faithful that Dementia became really angry. He waved the old lady around as if she were a powerful lightsaber, and screams of pain filled the air as hundreds of unfriendlies were branded by its boiling hot tip. The crowd slowly dissipated. Eventually, all that remained were Dementia and Wertheimer. Dementia helped Wertheimer to his feet and guided him back to the friendly territory. Wertheimer was hugely grateful to Dementia and promised to one day return the favour. "You can start by not farting in my face," thought Dementia childishly, as he watched Wertheimer's bum line him up as a potential target. As morning broke, the waft of baking bread filled the air of the friendly territory. Frother suddenly awoke from his deep sleep with short-term amnesia. He could not recall the past 24 hours. However, as Dementia approached him, things started to come flooding back. He flew up into the air and came swooping down towards Dementia. Magica once again came to the rescue just in the nick of time. She managed to stop Frother moments before he pulverized Dementia into the ground. Dementia would have been helpless to defend himself because he'd accidentally left his wand next to his bed. After enjoying a few pieces of delicious, freshly sliced bread, Dementia and his companions roamed the territory of the unfriendlies totally unopposed. Every time an unfriendly spotted Dementia, he or she would scurry away like a sewer rat and desperately seek cover. The word had obviously spread quickly. A great soul wizard loyal to the friendlies was now in town. That night, no friendlies were abducted. However, things were about to change.